Hey guys, for this video today, I will be discussing something that I have never discussed before. This is totally different from my normal discussion points, which are about uniforms, logos, and jerseys in football, hockey, and baseball. This is a totally different topic for me. And for this video today, if you are watching my channel for the very first time as a result of this video, I almost always discuss, almost exclusively, logos, uniforms, and jerseys for the NFL, the Canadian Football League, the National Hockey League, and Major League Baseball. And sometimes I talk a little bit about Hockey Canada's uniforms and sometimes a little bit of Canadian Hockey League uniform talk as well. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that I just usually almost exclusively talk about uniforms, logos, and jerseys. So for anybody who is a regular viewer of mine or a subscriber or both, this video is basically my channel's equivalent of the Detroit Red Wings wearing that 2016 Stadium Series uniform that they wore for that one outdoor game, where it had a big white diagonal sash on the front and a modernized Detroit Cougars logo as the main crest of that jersey, rather than their iconic and absolute classic winged wheel logo, which is one of the greatest hockey logos of all time as far as I'm concerned. But anyways, with the BC Lions situation, I will be sharing my thoughts on their decision to fire their head coach, DeVone Claybrooks, after just one single season. So an interesting statistic for anybody curious, DeVone Claybrooks has just become the second head coach amongst Vancouver's most professional franchises or major sports teams to be fired after just one season. So DeVone Claybrooks is now the second head coach amongst Vancouver's professional sports teams to be let go after just one season. Now, the other coach I'm referring to is John Tortorella, who was fired from the Vancouver Canucks after just one season at the end of the 2013-14 season, where after he was let go, that was when Willie Desjardins replaced him as the head coach of the Canucks. And then since he was hired, he's now been fired. And I believe Travis Green has been the coach ever since. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. So the reason I'm doing such a radically different type of video here compared to my normal video topics is because I'm a BC Lions fan myself, and I was honestly not expecting Claybrooks to be fired after just one single bad year as head coach of the Lions. So I gotta confess, this news really surprised the hell out of me. And I thought that I'd sit down and film a video because it's something that I do want to talk about, because once again, I was not expecting this to happen. Now, if you did expect this to happen, I certainly didn't. And I must say, I mean, for myself, I'm usually of the belief that a head coach should have at least 2 seasons to prove either A, they are able to turn a team around, and also B, make them a contender, or C, prove that they are not the right fit for the team that they've been hired to coach. So clearly after one season, the BC Lions felt that option C was the best way to describe their season and Claybrooks or DeVone's performance as head coach this year. So yeah, I mean, this situation is pretty damn crazy as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the BC Lions this past off season, before the 2019 season even started, went out and signed Mike Riley to a 4-year contract. He's one of the star quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League right now. And they signed him to probably the biggest contract in the CFL right now, money-wise. He was signed to a 4-year deal worth over $1 million. I believe closer between $1.5 to $2 million, if I'm not mistaken. And about $1.5 to $2.5 million, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that Mike Riley will be getting over $1 million when this contract's over. But yeah, I mean, this was one hell of a situation. One hell of a situation. I mean, BC went out and got a guy who's considered to be a star quarterback in the Canadian Football League. Plus, they had Brian Burnham, and they had a team that was, seen by quite a few people as a team that had a chance to at least be a playoff team. And they were a disaster. Not only did they have a 1-10 record at one point this season, but not only did they finish 5-13 to end the season, but on top of all of that, I believe this is the first time in Lions history that they went through an entire season without even being able to win a single game against any of the other teams in the West Division. That, in my opinion, and in every Lions fan's opinion, I'm sure, is completely unacceptable. You do not even make the playoffs without being able to beat teams in your own division. I mean, are you kidding me? The Lions had all year 18 games and they couldn't even win one against their own division. That is just sad. I mean, the only reason the BC Lions won any games is because they beat the Argonauts twice, and they were just a train wreck, an even bigger train wreck of a team than the Lions were this year. And the Lions beat the Red Blacks, who were also a catastrophic failure this season as well. And their one win against the Montreal Alouettes, was a win over a team that had their main quarterback serving a 1-game suspension, Vernon Adams Jr. I mean, if he was actually playing that game, I'm sure BC probably would have lost. Even though the Alouettes, if I remember correctly, did come pretty close to winning that game. If I remember correctly. But, I gotta say, this whole situation as a Lions fan, in my opinion, has been tough to watch. I mean, as a sports fan, I understand that, and I will say this to you viewers out there, that this is something you sign up for when you become a sports fan. I mean, you've got to expect teams to not just have moments of triumph all the time. Even the greatest teams in professional sports right now, such as the New England Patriots, are not going to be the storied franchise that they are right now forever. I'm sure that within 10 to 25 years from now, we'll be talking about how they will eventually be a dumpster fire in the NFL, like, say, the New York Jets have been for a very long time right now, and still are as of 2019. I mean, dynasties don't last. Look at the New York Islanders and the Edmonton Oilers of the National Hockey League, for example. Both franchises had their dynasties in the 1980s, and ever since 1990, neither team has won a Stanley Cup. So between 1980 and 1990, the Oilers and the Islanders, I believe, combined for 9 Stanley Cups. 9 of them. And since then, you know how many both franchises have won after basically 30 years now? 0. Not even 1. So that's an example right there of, hey, your team could be on top of the world today, but they're a dumpster fire tomorrow. In fact, the BC Lions, I believe, went a good 20 years where they made the playoffs every year. So the fact they made it to the playoffs that many years in a row is commendable in of itself, as far as I'm concerned. But my point is that with the good comes the bad and the ugly. If you're a sports fan, if you have a favorite team, there's going to come a point in time where your team is either really good, and there's going to be times where your team ends up being an absolute disaster. It's just the way it works. I mean, you might not think it's going to happen, but it will eventually happen. If your team has been a dumpster fire for a very long time, there will come a point where your team actually does do well. Even if they never actually win a championship like the Vancouver Canucks, I mean, your team will eventually get to a point where they're at least competitive. And the thing is that right now the BC Lions are in a situation where they're one of the absolute dumpster fires of the Canadian Football League. I mean, it's just a part of the way sports works. It is. So, with the BC Lions, though, I mean, I'm of the belief that a coach should have at least a second year to prove whether they're the right fit or not. So seeing the Lions firing their coach after just 1 year was something that really surprised me. I thought that he was worthy of a second chance, but here's the thing. I'm not a part of the team's day-to-day operations. None of us know what really goes on behind the scenes. So for them to fire him after 1 year, they clearly had good reason for it. I mean, I saw on the news, on our local news where I live, about the fact that, there was talk that Claybrooks was very easygoing and relaxed. I mean, yeah, he wore shorts on the sidelines and wore his hat sideways. I get it. But you know what? I mean, I understand that a lot of people criticized him for the way he dressed himself. But I will say this, though. If Claybrooks was the coach of a 13-5 record BC Lions team rather than a 5-13 record team, I don't think quite as many people would be complaining about the way that he's dressed. Now, as my dad once said to me, I know there's always going to be the type of people, there will always be at least one person who has a complaint. And as my dad once said to me, you can make someone the finest filet mignon dinner possible, and you could make that dinner for 1,000 people, and there will always, or X amount of people, and there will always be at least one person somewhere that'll have something to complain about, which is very true. But, I gotta say, I mean, for me, and I know that I probably have a very different opinion from a lot of people, but for me, I don't care how a coach dresses themselves. I care about how the team performs with that person as the coach of the team. And after 1 year of DeVone Claybrooks, the BC Lions sucked. They sucked. Couldn't even beat anybody in their own division once this year. This season, to me, was about the same type of write-off as a totaled car in an accident. Basically, the BC Lions were a train wreck. They were. And the only reason they aren't even more awful on paper than they really were is because of the fact that the Red Blacks and the Argonauts were even worse. Even bigger dumpster fires than the BC Lions. But my goodness, I mean, this is quite the situation. But, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I mean, for Claybrooks to be fired after 1 year, clearly the organization had some very, very clear, what's the way to put it? There were some clear signs that they felt he wasn't the right fit and he needed to go. I mean, I know that Ed Hervey said on the news when I saw his press conference kind of saying that, well, regarding Claybrooks, that, well, some players really respect and enjoy a more relaxed coaching style, and some players will, quote unquote, take advantage of it. I mean, I'm not a part of the team itself to know what went on behind the scenes, but, you know, which he was a very relaxed, easygoing coach. I mean, I that's what I could see as a fan. And the thing is, I can understand that not really working, you know. But at the same time, if that coaching style was resulting in a better team that was winning games and competing for the Grey Cup, I don't think we'd even be having this discussion at all. But clearly, things might have been, from what I see, at least in my opinion, judging from what I've seen and heard, I think that he was probably too relaxed and too easygoing. I mean, when you've got, I believe, the highest paid player in the CFL on your team, you need to be able to do better than 5-13. I mean, this season was just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. And it showed. I mean, this team had arguably one of the absolute best quarterbacks in the CFL right now in Mike Riley, and they couldn't even beat their own division teams once. It was a bad year. And honestly, I can appreciate 100% why BC let Claybrooks go after 1 year. I mean, I'm of the belief that a coach should have at least 2 years to prove themselves. But here's the thing. I mean, for a coach to be fired after just 1 year, there's clearly significantly good reasons why. Because a team does not just fire a coach after 1 year. There's got to be good reason why. And in my opinion, I feel that DeVone Claybrooks was not the right guy for the job, clearly. I mean, if all this talk that I've seen on the news about him being really relaxed and maybe too relaxed was true, I can understand why he was not a good fit. And it would not surprise me if some players became too comfortable and that the team didn't really click. I mean, I know that when they fired their offensive coordinator, that's when the BC Lions went on that 4-game winning streak. But clearly, that was not enough to fix the train wreck that had already happened. I mean, as I said earlier, at one point in the season, the BC Lions were 1-10. They were the absolute worst team in the CFL. So the only bright spot they had was that 4-game winning streak that not only at least ensured that they weren't going to go down as the worst team in the CFL this year, but because of that win streak, they were actually playing the Eskimos in a meaningful game a month ago, where if they did win, they would have still had a small shot at the playoffs. And the Eskimos would have actually been in a bit of trouble. But because the Eskimos ultimately won, since the Red Blacks and the Argonauts were even bigger dumpster fires than the BC Lions, the Eskimos are playing the Alouettes this coming Sunday as I'm filming this in the semifinal game in the East as a crossover team. But yeah, I mean, this was a tough year to watch as a Lions fan myself. It was brutal. Brutal. Bad. Just downright bad. Now, I have a feeling that next year will be better. At least I hope so. It better be. Goodness me. It was terrible this year. But I mean, you've got an incredible player like Brian Burnham. And you've got, a guy who's supposed to be one of the best quarterbacks in the CFL, Mike Riley. I mean, the Lions got to be better than 5-13. So, in my opinion, although normally under normal circumstances, I feel a coach should have at least 2 seasons to prove themselves. I mean, I see why the Lions let Claybrooks go, especially of all this talk that I've seen on the news recently about how relaxed and easygoing Claybrooks was as the coach. I can understand why they decided, okay, we need somebody who's a little bit more strict and holds the players a little bit more accountable. Because to me, with this decision, although I am still really surprised overall that they let him go after only 1 season, which, as I've said many times now, there was damn good reason for him to go after only 1 season. That you don't just let a coach go after 1 year. There has to be really good reason and good grounds for it. But, I gotta say, I mean, this year was a disaster year for the Lions. It really was. And they should have been better than 5-13, as far as I'm concerned. But at this point, I would just be happy if next year they could at least win 1 game against the West Division, because Jesus Christ, that not winning a single game against your own division is just bloody embarrassing. Embarrassing. Joke as far as I'm concerned. But, this whole, even with Claybrooks and how he wears his hat sideways and even has worn shorts on the sidelines, I mean, as I said earlier, if the BC Lions were actually competitive and a really good team, I don't think people would really be complaining about it as much. For me, I'm not worried about how a coach dresses. But I will say this. I do think that, at least in my opinion personally, I do think that the way you do dress and present yourself does give off a certain... It does kind of show you what a person is like. I mean, if a coach dresses more traditional and more professionally on the sidelines, that they're, to me, it shows that they have a bit more of a standard. At least this is my opinion. It does show people how you conduct yourself, whether you're a person who means business or maybe you're too relaxed. I mean, basically what I'm trying to say is, I do agree with people that he should have presented himself more as more of an authority figure. I feel he was a bit too relaxed. I do think that if he was a defensive coordinator again, like he was before, that would be a better fit for him. Clearly. But you know what? I mean, and also there are some people that are really good when they follow other people, and there's some good people that are really good when they get to lead people. That's the way us humans are wired. But anyways, guys, on that note, I am going to call it a wrap on this video. And as a Lions fan myself, I just hope that BC has a better year next year. And at this rate, I'd just be happy if they could even win 1 game against the Western Division, even just one. I mean, when you've got expectations that low, your team is not very good right now. But anyways, if you have anything you want to add to my video in the comments section below, or there's anything that I've said in here that in my video that you want to correct me on, by all means, feel free to do so. But yeah, guys, overall, I mean, as a BC Lions fan myself, I decided to do this video because I got to confess, I was really quite surprised when they let Claybrooks go after just 1 year. But at the same time, though, if I haven't made it clear enough, I will say this. I can definitely respect and understand why BC decided that they needed somebody else and they needed to let him go. DeVone Claybrooks go, I mean. Now, as for who BC could replace him with, well, Rick Campbell was the coach of the Red Blacks when they won their first Grey Cup as a franchise. He just got fired. I have a feeling it might be him. I could be wrong. Another name I've heard thrown around is Paul LaPolice. Now, I don't know if he would be necessarily going back into coaching, but you never know. But at this rate, I know one thing. Ed Hervey said he wants a CFL experienced coach, which I agree. BC desperately needs one. And hopefully the coaching change will lead to a better team next year. I say that as a BC Lions fan, of course, eh? But anyways, guys, on that note, I hope you've all enjoyed this video if you've stuck around, and I'd love to hear what people think about this decision that the Lions have made. And on that note, folks, I'm going to call it a wrap on this video. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and until my next video, as always, you guys, take care, and of course, as usual, bye for now.